What would you do if a father abandoned his own daughter in the middle of a deadly snowstorm only for her to be saved by a silent stranger whose past was as dark as the night itself? Is this the beginning of salvation, or a fate even? More dangerous, the snow wasn't a blanket, it was a blade. Each flake driven by a wind that howled like a banshee was a tiny razor against my exposed skin. I didn't remember a time when I wasn't cold. The world had shrunk to this blinding white agony, a universe of ice and pain where the only sound was the shriek of the wind and the frantic, ragged beat of my own heart. My name was Alara Vance. I was 14 years old, though the girl who had answered to that name felt like a ghost, a whisper from another lifetime. Children were meant to be cherished, kept warm by a hearth, their bellies full. I was none of those things. I was a debt, a burden, a thing to be discarded in the vast, unforgiving wilderness when I was no longer of use. Ahead, the silhouette of a man on a horse was my only landmark in the swirling chaos. My father, Silas Vance. He hadn't looked back not once since we'd left the last semblance of a trail. Not when my worn shawl, my last link to my mother, was ripped from my shoulders by a grasping branch. Not when I stumbled, my hands scraping raw against the jagged ice hidden beneath the powder. The coppery taste of blood filled my mouth, but I didn't cry out. Tears froze on your face, and Silas hated tears. He called them a currency for the weak. Keep your legs moving, girl. His voice cracked through the storm, thin and sharp. No time for weakness. I tried. God's how I tried. My limbs were hollow reeds, trembling and threatening to snap. My lungs burned with every breath. But I was starving, and the relentless cold had seeped into my very marrow. I fell again, this time with a gasp that the wind stole from my lips. I watched my cheek pressed against the frozen earth as his silhouette blurred, then dissolved completely into the white curtain of the storm. He was gone. The finality of it was a blow more brutal than the wind. He had left me to die. By nightfall, the storm's fury lessened, but the cold intensified, settling over the land like a burial shroud. I had found the hollow of a fallen log, a pitiful shelter that did little to turn back the killing frost. My fingers were no longer mine. They were numb, useless things at the ends of my hands. The pain had receded, replaced by a soft, insidious lethargy. It whispered to me a sweet and deadly lullaby. Lie down, little girl. It's time to sleep. Let it all go. I almost listened. I was so tired. But then a new sound cut through the night. A single mournful howl answered by another, and then a chorus. Coyotes. They were close. The scent of my freezing, desperate flesh was a dinner bell. A primal fear, deeper and hotter than the cold, jolted through me. I wouldn't be food. I would not be torn apart and scattered across this cursed snow for my father to never find. With strength I didn't know I possessed, I pushed myself up. My hand closed around a thick, broken branch, its jagged end a crude spear. I couldn't feel my fingers gripping it, but my will held it fast. Let them come. Let the bastards bleed with me. A low growl rumbled from the shadows just beyond my log. A dark shape low to the ground materialized. Its eyes gleamed 2 points of predatory light in the gloom. It wasn't afraid, and in that moment neither was I. Rage was a furnace in my chest. Then a sharp, piercing whistle sliced through the air. The coyote froze, its head cocked. An instant later, something dark flew through the air and thudded into the snowbank right between me and the predator. A spear. It stood quivering, a stark line of defiance against the white. The animal yelped a sound of pure shock and bolted into the darkness. I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched, dazed, as a figure emerged from the ridge, descending with a silent, measured grace. He was tall, wrapped in thick furs and leathers that made his form immense. In one hand he carried a torch, the firelight dancing across the snow and casting his face in a mask of shadow and light. He stopped a few feet away, his presence a solid wall against the night. His eyes, dark and unreadable, moved over me. There was no pity in his gaze, none of the soft sympathy I'd learned to despise. It was the calm, calculating assessment of a hunter. I swallowed, my throat raw. "Are you real?" I whispered the words, a painful rasp. He didn't answer. He knelt, his movements fluid. His gaze dropped to my bleeding hands, my frostbitten ears, the thin leather of my boots that offered no protection. Then, still in that unnerving silence, he reached for me. I flinched, expecting a blow, a rough shove. Instead, he scooped me into his arms as if I weighed no more than a bundle of sticks. The sheer strength of him was staggering. I didn't fight. There was no fight left in me. As he turned and began to carry me away from my pathetic shelter, I closed my eyes against the stinging snow and whispered a single desperate plea. "Don't leave me. He said nothing, but his arms tightened, a silent, profound answer that was more than enough. Warmth was the first thing I knew. A deep, penetrating warmth that made my frozen limbs ache and throb with a pain that was a testament to being alive. I was inside a small circular dwelling, an earthen lodge. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, herbs, and something else, something musky and animal. I was tucked under layers of heavy wool and soft furs. A fire crackled in a central pit, its light painting the curved walls in flickering shades of orange and red. I heard a soft, rhythmic grinding sound. Pushing myself up on my elbows, a wave of dizziness washing over me, I saw an old woman across the fire. Her skin was a beautiful tapestry of wrinkles, her silver hair woven into two long, thick braids. Her eyes, when she looked up at me, were like chips of obsidian, ancient and knowing. She didn't smile, just held up a hand, a silent command to remain still before returning to her work grinding something in a stone bowl. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Where was I? Who were these people? The old fears honed by a lifetime of caution surged through me. I was a girl, alone and weak, a valuable commodity in the wrong hands. The hide flap over the entrance was pushed aside and the man from the storm entered. He had to duck his head to clear the low doorway. Inside, he seemed even larger, his broad shoulders filling the space. His black hair was in a single long braid down his back, and a rifle was slung across his chest. He didn't so much as glance at me. He spoke to the woman in a low, guttural language I didn't recognize, his words flowing like a river over stones. He then sat by the fire, pulling off his thick gloves to warm his hands. I watched him, my fear warring with a strange, grudging gratitude. He had saved me. I owed him my life. The thought sat heavy in my gut. Debts were always collected. "You saved me," I said, my voice hoarse. He didn't respond. He continued to stare into the flames, his face a stoic mask. "Why?" I pressed. "Don't you speak English?" He finally turned his head and looked at me. His gaze was intense, direct. It felt like he was looking straight through my skin into the bruised and battered thing that was my soul. "Enough," he said. His voice was a low rumble, flat and final. I shrank back against the furs. I hated this feeling, the smallness, the powerlessness. It was the same feeling Silas gave me. I had to fight it. Defiance was my only armor. "Are you going to sell me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The old woman let out a dry, rasping laugh. "You think you worth silver?" she asked, her accent thick. My face burned with shame and anger. "I've been sold," before I muttered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. That got the man's attention. His eyes narrowed slightly. He studied me again, a new intensity in his look. "What is your name?" "Alara Vance." "Vance," he repeated the word, a foreign sound on his tongue. "I don't need your help," I added quickly, trying to reclaim some ground. "I can take care of myself." "Then why were you dying?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. The simple, direct question disarmed me. My jaw locked. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the roar of my own humiliation in my ears. The woman said something sharp in their language. The man stood crossed to the other side of the lodge and began unrolling a deerskin bundle. Inside were tool stones, strips of dried meat. "I'll be gone by morning," I announced to his back. "You don't have to keep me." "I didn't," he replied without turning around. His words confused me. "What does that mean?" The woman gave a slow shake of her head and, muttering under her breath, pushed aside the flap and disappeared into the cold outside. The man remained silent. My frustration boiled over. "You don't get to be some quiet, noble hero," I snapped. "I've met men like you. You think rescuing someone gives you the right to own them. I think nothing of you," he said. His voice still flat, not even looking up from his task. Not yet. His dismissal was more stunning than any threat. I was so used to being seen as an object of value, of use, of contempt, that to be seen as nothing at all was a shock. I let out a bitter, shaky laugh. "You've got a real way with words," I said sarcastically. "I bet you're popular." "Nothing. Do you at least have a name?" The silence stretched thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke a single word. "Cale." "Cale," I repeated. "Well, Cale, if you're planning on leaving me somewhere, just get it over with. I don't want to get used to this." I gestured vaguely at the warm, smoky lodge, the furs, the fire, the first real comfort I'd known in years. He didn't look up from his work. "Don't get used to anything," he said. "Not in winter." I stared at his broad back, at the firelight dancing in his dark hair. A strange and unsettling thought occurred to me. "You're not like the other men I've known." He paused in his work. A long moment passed. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that settled deep in my bones. "I hope not." The next morning, the world was reborn. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape of glittering, untouched snow under a sky of impossible blue. Cale was already outside, the rhythmic thwack of his axe splitting firewood echoing in the crisp air. I stood in the doorway, wrapped in furs that were far too big for me, watching him. He moved with an efficient fluid power, each swing of the axe a study in controlled force. He was like a creature born of this wild land, as much a part of it as the pines and the stones. "Where is this place?" I asked, my voice small in the vast quiet. He didn't turn. "Safe. That's not an answer." "It's better than most," he replied, swinging the axe again. I stepped out into the snow, which came up to my knees. The cold was clean and sharp, no longer the biting, malicious thing from the storm. "Where are you taking me, south?" "Why?" This time he stopped his work and looked at me. His expression was serious. "You were being followed." My blood ran cold. "What, 2 riders? They were close when I found you." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Barlow. It had to be. The brothel owner my father had sold me to. A brutal man with cold eyes and ownership papers that bore my name. I wanted to lie to deny it, but the truth came out in a choked whisper. It was a man named Barlow. My father, he owed him money. He sold me for a few bottles of whiskey and a box of bullets." Cale's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. He turned away, tossing another split log onto the growing pile. I ran. I continued, the words tumbling out now. I bit him, took a skinning knife from his belt, and I escaped into the storm. My father, Silas. He said I wasn't worth the trouble. He said I should have died with my mother. Cale didn't speak. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just listened. "Maybe I should have," I whispered to the snow. He looked back at me, his gaze locking with mine. "You didn't." I blinked, thrown by his simple, unshakable certainty. "I have seen death," he added, his voice low. "It does not let go easily. You are not finished yet." "Then what am I?" The question was a cry from the deepest part of my soul. He paused, his eyes scanning my face as if searching for an answer there. "You are fire," he said quietly, "not kindling." I didn't understand what he meant, not then. But the words settled in my bones, a strange and unfamiliar warmth. It felt like something I might one day come to believe. We packed to leave that day. The old woman, whose name I learned was Nasha, pressed a bundle of dried herbs and meat into my hands, her touch surprisingly gentle. She spoke something to Cale, her eyes on me, and he nodded. As we mounted his Mustang, I stole one last look at the snow-covered trail my father had taken. There were no tracks left, only the smooth, unbroken white. But the fire inside me, the one Cale had named, hadn't gone out. Not yet. The silence between us as we rode was a living thing. It was not the empty, awkward silence of strangers, but the deep, watchful quiet of the wilderness itself. Cale rode ahead, his body moving in perfect sync with the powerful Mustang. I clung to the saddle behind him, my arms aching, my body stiff, but my eyes were sharp. I watched everything. I memorized the way he navigated without a trail, reading the broken branches, the direction of the moss on the rocks, the subtle shifts in the wind. He could smell a storm coming, taste the direction of water on the air. He was a man made of secrets, the land had told him. At dusk, we made camp on a narrow ridge overlooking a dried-up creek. Cale dismounted, and I slid off clumsily, my legs buckling. I hit the ground with a hiss of pain. "You are not made for long rides," he observed without judgment. "I'm not made for any of this," I muttered, rubbing my bruised hip. He gave me a rare, fleeting glance. "Good. That means you will adapt." He began building a fire with an economy of motion that fascinated me. I knelt beside the prepared ring of stones, my hands hovering uselessly. "Let me," I said, the words surprising me as much as him. He looked at me for a long moment, then passed me the flint and steel. He didn't offer instruction, just nodded once. My first few attempts were clumsy failures, producing only sparks that died instantly. My frustration grew, my cheeks flushing with shame, but then on the 6th or 7th try, a spark caught a piece of tinder. I blew on it gently, carefully, my heart in my throat, until a tiny, determined flame flickered to life. A fierce surge of pride, hot and unfamiliar, washed over me. Cale sat beside me, offering a strip of jerky. It was tough and smoky, and I chewed it hungrily. "Survival school taught by a man of 1,000 words," I said dryly. He didn't smile, but the firelight caught a glimmer in his eyes that might have been amusement. After we ate, he began to meticulously carve a new arrowhead. The silence returned, but it felt different now, less like a wall and more like a shared space. "Why did you bring me with you?" I asked, quietly poking the fire with a stick. He didn't look up from his work. "Better than leaving you for the wolves. Or for them. You don't know me, I said. Maybe I'm trouble. He set down the arrowhead and finally looked at me, a slow, deliberate nod. You are. The blunt honesty of it startled a laugh out of me, a real, genuine sound that felt foreign in my own throat. Later, curled in my blanket beneath a rock shelf that smelled of dust and ancient stone, I couldn't sleep. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind, sent a jolt of alarm through me. Cale returned from a silent patrol of our perimeter, settling by the dying embers of the fire to sharpen his knife. The soft shing-shing-shing of steel on whetstone was a strangely comforting sound. Did you always live like this? I asked the darkness. Out here, for a time, was his clipped reply. Do you have a family? His hands stilled for a barest second before resuming their rhythmic motion. The silence was his answer. I hugged my knees to my chest. I had a brother once. His name was James. He was younger. He died of a fever when I was 8. I can still remember his laugh. It sounded like a high-pitched little bird. I paused, the memory a sharp ache. After he died, Ma stopped singing. And Pa, he got meaner. Then she passed too. After that, there wasn't much family left. The sound of the knife sharpening stopped. Cale looked at me across the glowing embers. There was no pity in his eyes, none of the cheap sentiment I'd come to expect from people. There was only a profound, quiet understanding. And in that moment, that meant more than anything. The land grew warmer, the snow giving way to red earth and hardy brush. Cale taught me things in his silent way. He would point, say a single word in his language for a plant, then show me how to crush its leaves to make a poultice, or dig for its edible root. He never explained more than was necessary. I learned to be a student of his silence. One afternoon, he reined in his horse, abruptly dismounting and kneeling by a patch of disturbed dirt. Tracks, he said. I slid from the horse and crouched beside him. The hoof prints were faint but clear. How old? 2 days. Maybe 3. Are they ours? From when we passed through? He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Wrong stride. Heavier horse. My chest tightened. They're still following us. Could be other travelers, he said, but his jaw was set in a hard line that told me he didn't believe it. We changed our course, moving into rougher terrain. I said nothing, but my hand rested on the hilt of the small skinning knife he'd given me. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was mine. That night, our camp was more cautious. A smaller smokeless fire tucked deep between a cluster of high boulders. Cale was different too. His stillness was charged with a new level of alertness. I watched as he set small tripwires made of twine strung with bells fashioned from copper and bone. He handed one to me. You place this, he said. It wasn't a request. I blinked. Me. You will need to know how. My fingers were clumsy, but I followed his instructions, my determination overriding my fear. When I was finished, he checked my work and gave a single sharp nod of approval. The gesture felt like high praise. Later, lying awake, I heard it, a faint, distant sound almost lost on the wind. Hoofbeats. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. Cale was already awake, a dark shape crouched at the edge of our camp, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. We stayed frozen, listening until the sound faded away. Scouts, he murmured into the darkness. How many? I whispered. Couldn't tell. Might not be looking for us. But if they are, what do we do? He looked at me, his eyes dark pools in the faint starlight. We keep moving, and you stop being afraid of the blood you may have to spill. That night I dreamed of my mother's hands, soft and warm, brushing the hair from my face as she hummed a lullaby. When I woke, my fingers were curled into tight fists. I was done being the hunted. The next day, as we navigated a ravine thick with buzzing insects, a plan began to form in my mind, a desperate, dangerous idea. I won't be sold again, I said suddenly, my voice hard. I won't be a victim. I can help. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. I know, he replied. Do you? I challenged, my frustration flaring. Because I'm tired of being the one in danger. I want to be the danger. That earned his full attention. He reined in his horse and turned to face me fully. A long moment passed. You can be, he said, his voice quiet but intense. But that means choosing who you are right now. I am not what my father sold, I said, my voice shaking with a conviction I didn't know I had. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate gesture. Then prove it. That evening, the smell of a campfire drifted on the wind from the north. Barlow's men. We made a false trail, bending branches, leaving scuffs from my boots, even dropping a small piece of jerky, all leading toward a wide, slow-moving river. Then we doubled back, climbing a steep, hidden goat path up the side of a bluff. From the top, we could see their fire glowing in the valley below. They had bought it. "Thank you," I whispered to him in the darkness. He didn't answer, just settled onto a ledge, his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the valley like a hawk. I sat beside him, the cold stone seeping through my clothes. "You still think I'm fire?" I asked. He nodded, his gaze never leaving the camp below. "Then I promise you," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I will not go out." He didn't smile, but I saw something shift in his gaze as it met mine. It might have been respect. It might have been hope. High above the canyon, watching our enemies, I was no longer a girl waiting to be saved. I was learning how to fight. The desert had teeth. We rode through a landscape of jagged red rock that stretched to a horizon bent by the oppressive heat. I was on my own horse now, a scrappy little mare Cale had acquired at a remote trading post. I sat taller in the saddle, my hand resting on the pommel, not for balance, but with a sense of belonging. The child who had huddled behind Cale for protection was gone. I was her ghost. That morning, Cale finally broke the silence. Crows. Flying south. He pointed to a dark smudge of birds in the sky. "Is that a bad sign?" I asked, my voice raspy from the dust. "It is a sign," he replied. His riddles used to infuriate me. Now I understood. He was teaching me to see, not just to look. He scanned a high ridge, his body going still. A thin plume of dust, too straight to be caused by the wind, curled into the air. "We are not alone," he muttered. The chase was on. We pushed our horses down a narrow draw, the sound of their hooves echoing loudly off the sandstone walls. The panic, cold and familiar, began to rise in my throat. "What happens if they catch us?" I asked, my voice tight. Cale didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the path ahead. "They won't. But if they do," I insisted. He finally turned his head, and his gaze was so calm it was unnerving. "Then we will see if you are still fire." We reached a dry creek bed, and Cal called a halt. From his saddlebag he pulled a small pouch and a pot of red ochre. Not gunpowder, but paint. He dipped 2 fingers in the pigment, and drew 2 short, sharp lines beneath his own eyes. "What is that for?" I asked. "The spirit of the hunter," he said. To see better, he didn't answer. "Have you ever painted your face number? Sometimes a person must do it to remember what they are." I hesitated, then took the pot from him. I dipped my own fingers in the cool, earthy pigment. I didn't draw the same lines as him. Instead, I drew a single straight line down from my forehead over the bridge of my nose. "To remember who I am not," I said. A flicker of something approval perhaps crossed his face. "Good." The trail led us into a wide, bowl-shaped canyon littered with petrified wood that looked like the bleached bones of giants. Near the top, nestled under a deep overhang, was a shallow cave. "This is where we fight," I stated. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "If we must." We spent the rest of the day turning the canyon into a trap. We rigged rockfalls, set snares, and found our positions. Cale took a high perch on an upper cliff face. He gave me a long, heavy knife. "Do not waste a single movement. The throat or the tendon behind the knee." "Understand," I nodded, my face a tight mask. By the time the sun began to bleed across the western sky, I could feel them coming. It was a pressure in the air, a wrongness in the wind. Night fell, cloaking us in a blanket of stars. I crouched behind a stone ledge, my rifle cool and solid in my steady hands. I could hear my own heart, a frantic drum against my ribs, but I kept it leashed. I did not think of Silas. I did not think of pain. I thought only of the sight at the end of my rifle. The first voice drifted across the dark, slick and mocking. "You out there, girl, I know you can hear me. No sense in hiding. Barlow." The sound of his voice was a violation. "I'll make it quick if you come on down. But if you make me come up there, I'll carve my name into your back so you never forget who you belong to." I glanced toward Cale's position. He was an unmoving shadow. Then I saw them, 3 men moving low through the trees. Barlow stepped into the moonlight, his rifle held casually as if he were on a Sunday hunt. "You think that Redskin can save you," he called out. "He'll die right alongside you." Slowly, Cale stood. His silhouette against the moon was that of a vengeful god. "Turn back now," he commanded, his voice echoing in the canyon. Barlow grinned, a flash of white teeth in the dark. "Well, look who speaks. You'll find only death here." "You first," Cale replied. Barlow was raising his rifle, but he was too slow. The crack of Cale's shot was sharp and final. One of Barlow's men crumpled to the ground without a sound. The canyon erupted. Curses and gunfire filled the air. I flinched, then took aim as another man darted between boulders. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, and the man went down with a strangled groan. I moved, crawling over rocks, reloading with hands that were surprisingly steady. I was no longer reacting. I was fighting. Kale's shots were measured precise. I heard a scream and then a shape was scrambling up the rocks right above me. Ilara Kale's shout was a warning. I turned just as Barlow lunged. He was on me, his weight crushing his breath hot and foul. We tumbled down a short, steep slope, his knife flashing in the moonlight. I felt a searing pain as it grazed my shoulder. I screamed not in fear but in fury and kicked him hard in the stomach. I scrambled back, my sleeve already dark and wet with blood. He spat dirt, his face a mask of rage. You little I didn't let him finish. I lunged forward, not with the rifle but with the heavy knife Kale had given me. I drove it deep into his thigh. He howled a sound of shock and agony and swung wildly. I ducked under his arm and stabbed again, this time in his side, putting all my weight behind it. He gasped a wet, choking sound and collapsed. I stood over him, my chest heaving, the knife dripping in my hand. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a hatred that was being rapidly extinguished by death. My father, I panted, would have died screaming. And I meant it. I raised the knife to finish it, to cut the evil out of the world. But a strong hand closed around my wrist. Ilara. Kale's voice was quiet but firm. He would have killed me, I sobbed, the adrenaline finally giving way to a violent tremor. He won't. Not now, Kyle said. He gently took the knife from my hand. I let it fall. He pulled me away as Barlow's life rattled out of him in the dust. We leave him. He looked down at the dead man. He is already gone. By dawn, the canyon was silent again. We buried the bodies in a shallow grave, Kale building a small cairn of stones over them. Not as a memorial, but as a seal. I stood by a small fire, my shoulder bandaged, the ache a dull throb. You didn't stop me because of him, I said, looking at the cairn. Kale was tying off his bedroll. Number. Then why? He turned to face me, his expression uncharacteristically soft. Because you are not your father. And you are not him. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I needed to know that. You do now, I nodded. What now? I asked. There is a place south of here. A sanctuary. Women, children, outcasts. They have built their own peace. Are you taking me there? If that is where you wish to go. And if it's not, then we ride farther. I looked toward the rising sun, its light chasing the last of the shadows from the canyon. I think I want to see what peace looks like. He mounted his horse in one fluid motion. Then let's ride. As we left the canyon behind, I felt the air shift. Something inside me had settled. Not healed, perhaps, but hardened. Forged. I was no longer just surviving. I was becoming. The wind no longer bit at my skin. It was warm, carrying the scent of juniper and sun-baked earth. For the first time I rode ahead of Kale, the reins held loosely in my hand. I didn't look back. The canyon and the girl I had been were behind me. We rode for days, and the silence between us was a comfortable shared thing. It was the quiet of earned understanding. You ride well, Kale said one afternoon, breaking the stillness. A small smile touched my lips. You taught me. I did not teach you to lead. I glanced back at him. Maybe not. But I watched you. He gave a faint nod, his eyes holding a new light. It looked like trust. We came upon a slow-moving river shaded by tall cottonwoods. On the bark of one ancient tree were dozens of carvings, initials, symbols, glyphs I didn't recognize. I traced one with my finger. What does this mean? Memories, Kale said. Stories of those who passed this way. Should I leave mine? He looked at me, his gaze long and steady. Do you want to remember the girl you were, or mark the woman you have become? I stared at the bark. Ilara Vance. The name felt like a snake's shed skin, something I had outgrown and left behind. That girl was abandoned, sold, and hunted. This woman had stood over her enemy with a blade in her hand and fire in her soul. I drew my knife, found a smooth patch of bark, and began to carve. Not my old name. I carved the name Nasha had called me once in her language. Anya. She had said it meant sunlight through the storm. When I was done, Kyle read it and gave the smallest of nods. A good choice. As the sun dipped low, a new scent reached us on the wind. Smoke, yes, but also the acrid smell of gunpowder and blood. We dismounted and crept to the top of a low ridge. The sight below stole the breath from my lungs. A burned-out wagon, dead horses, and beside them a young woman lay still, her arms protectively shielding a small bundle. I moved before Kale could stop me, my feet carrying me down the slope. I knelt beside her. She was gone, shot through the heart. As Kale lifted the edge of the blanket, a tiny baby blinked up at us and let out a soft cry. My breath hitched. I gathered the child into my arms, rocking it instinctively. It wasn't fear I felt, or even just sorrow. It was a cold, focused rage. Cale found a spent cartridge shell near the wagon. Custom casing, he muttered. Barlow's men. The rest of them. I thought we got them all, I said through my teeth. Most. Not all. I stood the infant cradled against my chest, its small weight. A profound responsibility. Then we finish it. He met my gaze. Are you certain I am not a girl hiding in your shadow anymore, Cale? I said, my voice unwavering. They need to learn that. We buried the mother and rode hard, tracking them to an old abandoned trading post. 4 men laughing and drinking, one of them wearing Barlow's distinctive coat. Cale looked at me. Do you want the lead? I looked down at the baby, now strapped safely to my back in a makeshift carrier. I gently transferred the bundle to him. I want the reckoning. I circled wide, a ghost in the tall grass. The guard at the back of the building never saw me coming. Inside, the men were bragging about the wagon, about the woman. I stepped into the doorway. She wasn't alone, I said coldly. Their faces slack with drink and arrogance twisted into shock. One reached for his gun. He was too slow. My shot was true. A second man lunged and a shot rang out from the rocks where Kyle waited, dropping him cleanly. The last 2 tried to run. I tackled one, cracking his head on the doorframe. The last one, the one in Barlow's coat, fell to his knees, begging. It wasn't me, he whimpered. I was just following orders. You followed the devil, I said, my eyes burning holes in him. Now you can burn with him. I fired one last time. Silence returned to the prairie. I walked out, my hands stained, my face calm. Cale was humming a soft, low lullaby to the baby. It's done, I said. He handed the child back to me. We rode south again, slower this time. The weight of what I had done was heavy, but it was a righteous weight. That night, under a canopy of 1,000,000 stars, I whispered to the baby. I don't know your name, little one, but I promise you your story will not end in fire and dust. Cale watched me from across our small fire. You have changed, Anya. No, I replied, meeting his gaze. I have just become who I was meant to be. The next morning we arrived. A small, peaceful settlement of adobe walls and low fences. Children played in the dust and women watched us approach with cautious, guarded eyes. An elder woman stepped forward. She saw the baby first, then me. Without a word, she opened the gate. I dismounted. I held the child for a moment longer, pressing a kiss to her soft head before handing her to the elder. I will stay a while, I told Cale. He raised an eyebrow. Only a while, long enough, I said, looking at the women and children gathering around us, to teach this little one what fire really is. How to tend it, how to control it. I looked back at him. Then I will ride again. Where, he asked. Wherever I am needed. He held out his hand. I took it, my grip firm and strong. We said nothing else. No goodbyes were necessary. He turned his horse and rode away, becoming a speck on the vast horizon without a backward glance. I turned back to the gate, the baby now settled in the elder's arms, her eyes on me. And for the first time in my life, I walked forward without fear into a place I might finally call home. In Alara's story, what touches us most is not only the storm or the cruelty of her father, but her journey to reclaim her true worth. Abandoned and sold like a possession, she could have surrendered to despair and let life extinguish her spirit. Yet through her inner strength and Kyle's guidance, she discovered a profound truth: within every person burns a fire, one that no one can take away unless we give it up ourselves. This lesson speaks deeply to us, especially in our later years, reminding us that life always holds room for renewal. Even after loss, hardship, or being overlooked, we can still rise, tend our flame, and share its warmth with others. That flame may be compassion, patience, or simply offering a steady hand to the next generation. The story reminds us that age and adversity never erase human value. Most important of all, as Alara proved, we are not ashes to be scattered. We are the living fire that can still light the path forward. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.